The first time he says it, it isn't about desire. It's about discipline. Stand still. His voice is low, controlled, and threaded with something that feels sharper than authority. She does. Not because she must. Because she chooses to. They are in the eastern gallery, long windows thrown open to the late afternoon wind. Banners stir above them. Servants move at a respectful distance, pretending not to listen. Her cloak has torn along the inner seam, caught on an iron latch while she was leaving the council chamber. She hadn't noticed until halfway down the corridor. He did. Stand still, the Duke repeats, stepping closer. There is nothing improper in the command. Nothing suggestive. Yet the space between them tightens instantly. She lifts her chin slightly, but does not move. The wind brushes her hair back over one shoulder. The torn fabric hangs loose at her waist. He steps behind her, close enough that she feels the warmth of him without contact. Turn slightly, he says. She does. His fingers brush the inside lining of her cloak, not her skin. Not yet. He studies the tear with quiet concentration. You walk through iron without noticing, he murmurs. I was thinking. That's evident. His tone is dry, but not unkind. His fingers slide along the fabric again, assessing damage. The touch is practical, controlled, and yet her pulse lifts. Because he is careful. Because he does not rush. Because no one else would dare handle her clothing like this in open air. A servant approaches at the far end of the gallery. The Duke does not move away. He simply angles his body, shielding the view without making it obvious. The servant lowers their gaze and passes. Only then does she exhale. You're very composed, she says quietly. Yes. You're also very aware. Yes. His fingers hook beneath the torn seam. Stand still, he says again, softer now. This time the words land differently. Not instruction. Permission. She stills completely. He unties the inner cord that secures the cloak at her waist. It loosens with a subtle sound, the weight shifting slightly against her back. You should have told me, he says. About a torn seam? About being distracted. She almost smiles. I wasn't distracted. No. He pauses. The wind moves through the open windows again, lifting the loosened fabric slightly. You were angry, he says. She doesn't answer. He's right. The council had pushed again, questioning her presence, her influence, the way decisions now pass through her hands before reaching his. They call it procedural. They call it reform. They mean control. His fingers withdraw from the torn seam and move lower, carefully, deliberately, to retie the inner cord. His knuckles brush the small of her back through the fabric. The contact is accidental, but it lingers a second longer than necessary. She inhales. Finished? She asks. Not yet. He steps closer. The gallery is empty now. The servants have dispersed. The air feels thicker, quieter. He smooths the cloak down along her spine, pressing the fabric flat with the palm of his hand. It is still a practical gesture. It does not feel practical. You carry tension here, he says, his hand resting between her shoulders. You're imagining things. I'm not. His thumb presses slightly, just once, testing. She exhales without meaning to. The Duke notices. Of course he does. You should not let them see that, he says. See what? That they affect you. She turns her head slightly, just enough to look at him over her shoulder. And do they affect you? She asks. His eyes hold hers. Yes. The honesty catches her off guard. He withdraws his hand slowly. The moment shifts back toward neutrality, but only barely. Your cloak is secure, he says evenly. She turns to face him fully now. The gallery feels smaller. You're very careful, she says. I have to be. Because of them. Yes. And because of me? He does not answer immediately. Yes, he says at last. A silence stretches between them. Uncomfortable, charged, impossible to misinterpret. You don't have to be careful with me, she says quietly. His jaw tightens. I do, he replies. Because you don't belong to me. The words land heavier than expected. I never suggested I did. No, he says. But others will. A distant bell rings somewhere in the keep. The day continues around them, unaware of the shift in air. He steps back, restoring space. The gallery feels cold without him near. We have a reception tonight, he says. Western delegation. I remember. You'll stand at my left. That's unusual. Yes. She studies him. You're provoking them. I'm clarifying. The same word he used before. She watches the way the wind moves his dark tunic slightly, the steadiness of his posture. You notice everything, she says. Yes. Even what no one else does. Yes. Her gaze drops, just briefly, to his hands. Strong. Controlled. Capable of untying knots no one else is allowed to touch. She looks back up. And what else have you noticed? She asks softly. His eyes darken. Not with hunger, not yet, but with awareness. That you don't like being handled by anyone, he says. That's obvious. And that you didn't move away. Her pulse jumps. I was standing still, she says. Yes. Because you told me to. No, he says quietly. Because you trusted me. The truth of it settles between them. The wind dies. The gallery stills. You shouldn't test that, she says. I'm not. He steps around her now, moving toward the end of the corridor. But as he passes, his hand brushes the side of her waist. Not accidental this time. Brief. Intentional. Controlled. She feels it long after he's gone. That evening, the reception hall glows with lantern light and low music. Delegates cluster in polished conversation, goblets in hand. She stands at his left. Exactly as promised. Not behind. Not hidden. At his left. Eyes follow them as they move through the room. Whispers rise and fall. The Duke's hand rests lightly at her back. Not possessive, not intimate. Just enough to anchor. A nobleman approaches, voice oily with false warmth. My lord, he says, bowing. My lady. His gaze lingers too long. The Duke notices. Of course he does. The nobleman extends a hand toward her, fingers brushing the edge of her sleeve. The Duke speaks before she can respond. Stand still, he says calmly. She does. Not frozen. Centered. The Duke steps closer, not between them, but close enough to alter the geometry of the room. His hand moves to her wrist. Not gripping. Holding. He lifts her arm slightly, just enough to adjust the sleeve where the nobleman's fingers had brushed. His thumb slides along the inside seam, undoing nothing, correcting everything. The nobleman withdraws his hand immediately. The message is clear. Only the Duke touches what others are not allowed to. He lowers her wrist slowly. Does not let go immediately. The room watches. She feels the heat of it. You're provoking them, she murmurs under her breath. Yes. And you're enjoying it. No, he replies. I'm setting boundaries. His fingers release her wrist at last. But the imprint of his touch lingers. The night stretches long. The whispers grow sharper. And for the first time, the command, stand still, no longer feels like discipline. It feels like something else entirely. The command follows her long after the reception ends. Stand still. It echoes not as instruction, but as anticipation. The hall empties slowly. Lanterns dim. Delegates withdraw in clusters of speculation. Whispers thicken in corridors like fog that refuses to lift. She does not leave immediately. Neither does he. The Duke dismisses the final attendant with a nod. The doors close. Silence settles heavy and private over polished stone and fading music. She stands near one of the tall windows now, moonlight cutting across the floor in pale bands. You embarrassed him, she says calmly, without turning. Yes. And half the Western Council. Yes. That was deliberate. Yes. The repetition no longer irritates her. It steadies her. She turns to face him. You touched me in front of them, she says. I corrected your sleeve. You held my wrist. Yes. And you made sure they saw. Yes. The air feels thinner now. He steps closer, not hurried, not aggressive. Just enough to close the distance that has been hovering between them all evening. You didn't move away, he says quietly. No. You didn't pull your hand back. No. Why? Because I wanted you to. She does not say it. Instead, because I wasn't finished standing still. His jaw tightens slightly at that. The moonlight catches the edge of his face, softening the sharp authority there into something warmer. More dangerous. They think this is about possession, she says. It's not. No. It's about permission, he says. Her pulse jumps. The word lands precisely. Permission. You didn't ask, she says. No. And yet I gave it. Yes. The space between them narrows again, closer than the reception allowed, closer than the gallery. Stand still, he says again. But this time it is not a command meant for public interpretation. It is quieter. Lower. She obeys. Not rigid. Not submissive. Centered. He approaches until he stands directly in front of her. His hand lifts, slowly, giving her time to refuse, and hovers near her collar. He does not touch her skin. He traces the outer line of the gown instead, following the seam downward with deliberate care. "You don't like being handled," he says softly. "No. And yet," she repeats. His fingers slide beneath the outer fold of the fabric, only enough to adjust the inner lining that has twisted slightly from the evening. The contact is minimal, but the proximity is not. Her breath slows deliberately. "You're testing me," she murmurs. "No," he says. "I'm undoing what shouldn't have been disturbed." His hand shifts, lower, to the narrow fastening at her side. It is a practical closure, invisible to anyone watching. Except no one is watching. "Stand still," he says again. Her fingers curl slightly at her sides. The fastening loosens beneath his touch. The fabric relaxes, not falling, just yielding. The air cools against her waist where it had been held tight. She feels it instantly, feels him notice her reaction. "You're aware of everything," she says. "Yes. Even now. Yes." He does not look away. That is the difference. He has always been careful, always measured, always distant enough to deny interpretation. Not tonight. Tonight he sees her. Fully. His thumb presses lightly against the edge of the loosened seam, not slipping inside, not claiming, just resting there. She inhales sharply. He stills immediately. "Too far?" he asks. The fact that he asks undoes her more than the touch itself. "No." He searches her face, not for performance, not for endurance, for truth. "You could stop me," he says. "I know. And you're not." "No." The moonlight shifts slightly as clouds move overhead. Shadows stretch and retreat. He steps closer, not pinning her, not yet. But the warmth of him surrounds her, steady and grounding. His hand moves upward this time, not to the fastening, but to her throat. He does not touch her neck. He touches the thin ribbon there, the narrow tie that holds the upper fold of her gown in place. His fingers curl around it. Slowly. "This," he says quietly, "is what no one else is allowed to touch." Her pulse pounds. The ribbon is not intimate in design. It is ordinary, which makes the moment far more dangerous. "If you undo it," she says softly, "there's no pretense left." "I know. And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he says, "they'll stop guessing." His fingers tighten slightly around the ribbon, but he does not pull. "Not yet." "Say it," he murmurs. "Say what?" "That this is not defiance." She swallows. "This is not defiance," she says. "What is it?" Her eyes hold his. "It's choice." The ribbon loosens under his fingers. Not dramatically, not in a rush. Just enough for the fabric at her collar to relax. Just enough to acknowledge that he crossed the line and she let him. Her breath leaves her slowly. The world narrows again to heat and silence. His hand slides from the ribbon down to her waist once more. Firm now, grounding. "You're trembling," he says. "I'm not." His thumb presses lightly into her side. "You are." She steps forward, closing the last of the distance herself. The movement shifts the power. He notices. Of course he does. Her hands rise, one resting against his chest, the other gripping the front of his tunic. "You're not the only one allowed to touch," she says quietly. His breath changes. Not dramatically, just enough. "You shouldn't provoke me," he murmurs. "You've been provoking me all night." The honesty hangs between them. The ribbon now undone, the seam loosened, the boundary clearly crossed. And still he waits. Still he does not take what she does not offer. That restraint is what undoes her. She tilts her face upward, not asking, inviting. He studies her for one suspended second, then leans in. The kiss is not urgent. It is deliberate, measured. His hand tightens at her waist as her fingers grip his tunic more firmly. There is no rush toward anything else. No frenzy. Just heat building where patience once stood. When he pulls back, it is not to end it. It is to look at her. "You're certain?" he says quietly. "Yes." "And you understand what this does?" "Yes." It ends caution. "Yes." His forehead rests briefly against hers. "Stand still," he murmurs one last time. She doesn't. She closes the space herself. And this time, when he reaches for the fastening at her side again, he does not stop. He does not rush her. That is the difference between hunger and decision. When his fingers return to the fastening at her side, they move with the same deliberate control they have always had. But this time, they do not retreat. The loosened seam gives way fully beneath his hand. Fabric softens, releases. The air shifts against her skin where the gown relaxes, and the sensation alone makes her breath unsteady. He notices. Of course he does. You're not standing still anymore, he murmurs. No, she replies. And she isn't. Her hands are still at his chest, but now they move, slowly, deliberately, sliding upward to his shoulders, fingers curling into the dark fabric at the base of his neck. He exhales through his teeth. You're certain, he says again, quieter now. Yes. And you understand. Yes. She does not let him finish. Because if he keeps asking, he might give her a chance to retreat. And she does not want it. Her fingers tighten slightly. He takes that as answer. His hand leaves her waist and moves upward, not roughly, not possessively, but firmly, sliding along her side, over the curve of her ribs through fabric that is no longer secured as tightly as it had been. The sensation is electric not because it is forbidden, but because it is intentional. You said no one else is allowed, she whispers. That's true. And tonight. Tonight, he says, voice low and steady. You're allowing me. The words land deeper than the touch. He pulls her closer, not slamming her against the desk, not pinning her helplessly, but pressing her into the solid edge just enough that she feels grounded. Contained by him, not trapped. His hand returns to the ribbon at her collar. It is already loosened. He finishes what he started. The ribbon slides free completely, and the upper line of her gown softens, dipping slightly lower, not revealing in scandalous display, but altered enough to change the air between them. He looks, and this time, he does not hide that he is looking. Her breath catches under his gaze. You're not careful anymore, she murmurs. I am, he replies. I'm just done pretending. His knuckles brush lightly along her collarbone. Not wandering, not greedy, just tracing. Her hands slide down from his shoulders to the front of his tunic, fingers working at the tie at his collar in slow, deliberate retaliation. He stiffens slightly. You're bold tonight, he says. You started it. He almost smiles. His hands settle firmly at her waist again, thumbs pressing lightly against her sides through loosened fabric. Stand still, he says once more. But now the words carry no restraint. They carry heat. She does not freeze. She centers. He leans in slowly, this time not stopping at the threshold of a kiss. His mouth finds hers with a controlled intensity that sends warmth through her spine. The kiss deepens gradually, not frantic, not desperate. Measured, intentional. His hand slides upward along her back, fingers spreading, feeling the shape of her through cloth that no longer hides structure the way it once did. She arches into him without thinking. He notices. You feel that? He murmurs against her mouth. Yes. Good. He turns her slightly, guiding her so that her hip presses against the desk more fully. His body follows, closing the distance completely now. There is no mistaking the closeness. No mistaking the shift. She grips his tunic tighter. He breaks the kiss just long enough to look at her. You're not afraid, he says. No. You should be. I'm not. His hand slides along the line of her waist again. Lower this time, but still restrained by fabric, still contained by control. The tension is not in what he takes. It's in what he could, and chooses not to. That's enough, he says suddenly. Her eyes widen slightly. Enough. For tonight. Her pulse stutters. You said you wouldn't stop. I won't, he says evenly. But I won't let this become something they think they forced. She studies him. Breath uneven, gown loosened, skin warm from his hands. You're still thinking about them, she says. I'm thinking about tomorrow, he corrects. He steps back slightly, just enough to restore breath and clarity. The space feels charged and incomplete. And yet, right. He reaches for her gown again, not to remove it further, but to retie the fastening at her side. His fingers move carefully, resecuring what he loosened. The gesture is almost more intimate than the undressing. You're undoing it, she says quietly. I'm choosing when, he replies. The ribbon at her collar remains untied. He does not fix that. The looseness stays, a mark of what passed. He smooths the fabric down once more, palm resting briefly at her waist. Tomorrow, he says, we don't hide. No, she agrees. And if they ask, I won't deny it. His gaze sharpens slightly at that. You'll say it openly. Yes. He studies her face, searching for hesitation. Finds none. You understand, he says, that this ends speculation. Yes. And starts something else. Yes. The bells begin ringing outside. Morning. The city waking. They step apart fully now. Not strangers. Not hidden. She adjusts her gown with calm hands, though the loosened ribbon remains untied. He notices. "Leave it," she says. He nods once. They leave the study together. Not touching, not avoiding, walking side by side through corridors already stirring with life. Servants glance up. Guards straighten. The shift is subtle, but unmistakable. By midday, the whispers return. But they are different. Not scandal. Recognition. At the council table, Bram watches them carefully. The Duke does not wait for accusation. She remains at my side. He says calmly before anyone else can speak. By her choice. And mine. Silence. No apology. No justification. She meets the council's gaze without flinching. "This changes nothing about my work," she says evenly. "Unless you intended to pretend my competence was accidental." No one answers. Because no one can. They had called her a distraction. Now they see something else. Not indulgence. Alignment. That evening, as the sun lowers over the eastern wall, they stand together on the ramparts. This time, there is no distance between them. His hand rests openly at her waist. Not hidden. Not subtle. "You don't have to say it again," she says quietly. "Say what?" "Stand still." He looks at her. Softens slightly. "I won't," he says. "Why?" "Because you're not waiting anymore." She reaches for his hand herself, placing it firmly at her side. "Public. Chosen. Good," she says. "The city watches. Let it." He did not undo what no one else was allowed to touch because he claimed her. He did it because she stood still, and then stepped forward. And that choice changed everything.